He slowly began to crawl towards her, and at the same time they said, "Because I intend to take you now." Claire was a little confused. The Marquise hugged her and looked straight into her eyes. And Claire said in an uncertain and embarrassed voice, "It hasn't been that long since the splint came off, so please be careful with your foot. Only if you ask." And then he rushed at her. Claire fell onto the sofa, and her soft, silky hair became disheveled. He began to lick and lightly bite her thin and emaciated neck. "Strange aroma? The smell is more than strange." He spoke with a small grin on his face. After that, they merged together. They kissed passionately and could not tear themselves away from each other. Claire has already scratched his entire back. And suddenly, they heard their aunt's voice. "Claire!" She didn't expect to hear her voice here. She pushed Marquis aside and stood up a little. "Aunt Gelda?" But the Marquis did not hear anything and did not understand what was happening. "What?" "I heard my aunt's voice just now." And then someone suddenly knocked on the door. The Marquis put on his shirt and opened the door. "What's happened?" A servant stood behind the door. "I'm sure it was the Teutonic Knight, Dylan, who gave the order." "I apologize for interrupting you, sir. So what happened? Did Sverkin invade us or what?" While the Marquise was talking with the servant, Claire could not find a place for herself and looked out for her aunt in the window. "Well, there's a woman standing here in the yard," Dylan said quietly, almost in a whisper. "The eldest child seems to have disappeared in the forest." Claire heard what the servant said and immediately thought about Finn. She turned away from the window and looked straight at the Marquise. She ran up to the Marquis and began to ask about the child. Her experiences knew no bounds. "What do you mean? Oldest child? Are you saying that my finances are missing?" "That's right, you're right." After this phrase, she fell to her knees and began to ask even more questions. "My aunt is downstairs, right? What happened to Finn?" The Marquise was very annoyed by Claire's behavior. He looked at her and didn't know what to do with her. He wasn't too worried about Finn, but still he ran up to her and said, "Stop making noise and get up." But Claire could not calm down and continued, "Please let me see my aunt." The Marquise realized that she would not get up on her own and took her in his arms. "What do you think you can achieve with all this?" "I have to go out and look for him," she answered. "Claire, before you get tied up, don't make me angry." But Claire did not hear the Marquis and burst into tears. "Please, sir, it's my mistake. I'm sure he got lost because he went looking for me. He asked me to stay with him, but I returned to the tower. I should have stayed with him. Please, I will do anything. So I ask, let me go find Finn." But there was only a malicious smile on the Marquise's face. She noticed this and realized that she didn't have a chance. "He enjoys watching me beg." This made her very angry, and she began to break away from the hands of the Marquise. "Let me in! Let me go!" The Marquise did not expect such behavior from Claire, and it made him very angry. "How dare you!" This was the Marquise's last straw. She angered him so much that he threw her on the bed. He tied her hands, pressed her to the wall, and said, "I told you, if you don't want to be tied up, you shouldn't make me angry." But Claire had no plans to give up. "Untie me now! I don't have time to do all this with you. But I'm the only one who decides anything here, forgot?" She tried to escape from the Marquis's trap, but all attempts were in vain. "Untie me! Untie me immediately!" She realized that the Marquise would soon leave. And in a fit of anger and bitterness, she shouted, "You crazy psycho!" But Marquis was not affected at all. On the contrary, it was even amusing. "Be a good girl and stay here. If you want a chance to at least get your child's corpse back, then you need to wipe your tears and just sit in silence." She sat alone in the room and had already lost all hope. All she had to do was just mutter to herself, "This damn psycho! This demon!" She even tried to call someone from the corridor. "Is there anyone there? Please untie me." But it was all in vain. There was silence outside the door. A lot of time wasted. Did they find him? Why is it so quiet? Is it possible that something happened? These questions didn't let her stop crying. Tears flowed like a river, and she plunged into memories. "Sorry, Jenna. Claire, take care of my children for me when I'm gone. Please, promise me." I swore that day that I would keep these children safe, even if it meant putting my life on the line. "I can't lose my family again. I'll go crazy with worry. It's like the helpless anticipation of death. the same as in childhood. But now I have people I have to protect. Claire kept repeating that if something happens to Finn, I won't forgive myself for it. I swear, I will plunge a knife into the Marquis's heart. All in tears, with tied hands and in bitterness, she screamed. Meanwhile, on the street near the entrance to the tower, guards kept Aunt Gelda. She struggled and screamed as best she could. Let me go! I need to see my niece immediately! She tried to shout to Claire so that she could hear her. Claire! Finn is missing! Meanwhile, the Marquis and his guards watched all this from the window of the tower. So that's why she ran to the tower. My apologies, sir. We did not expect her to overcome the thorn hedge. So she crossed the field of thorny thorns from her house to here? Yes. By the time the knights surrounded her, she was all wounded. No wonder she's her aunt. How long has it been since the child went missing? According to the woman, his bed was already empty when she checked at dawn. Apparently, he insisted that his mother spend the entire day with them yesterday. How is the search going? People are looking around the area. The last trace of the child was found where a pack of wolves was often seen. What should we do, sir? The Marquis became serious. It seemed he was thinking where to look for Finn. Meanwhile, all the servants and butlers were looking for the child. The regular workers were flanked by guards with torches. The servants whispered from time to time, "Do you think he's still alive?" Who knows? Several hours have already passed. The Marquis also participated in the search. He examined the area carefully and remembered, decades ago, I spent a lot of time in the tower. To prevent them from passing through the formation, my grandfather fenced it off with thorn bushes. The only paths to this tower, surrounded by a rough fence, lie through the mountain ranges or the valley. And from this, the Marquis drew conclusions. We move into the valley. Yes, sir. The Marquis walked quietly along the path and thought. He was absolutely serious. If you've come this far, you must be tired. He was probably scared by the cries of wild animals. I'm sure his instincts would have been to hide. After that, he heard some noise behind the bushes and decided to check what was there. The bushes were very thick, and he began to make his way through them. As he walked through the bushes, he saw a little boy. It was Finn. He curled up, was very scared, and spoke. Mother. Where are you? I think she said they were getting fatter. Meanwhile, Gelda continued to scream loudly, I'll go look for him myself. But all the guards held her back. And suddenly, the Gelda was released, and the guards bowed low. Is this your character trait that is inherited? Gelda turned around in tears and saw the Marquis holding a small and frightened Finn in his arms. Gelda hugged Finn tightly and said, Oh my God! Finn, my baby, my child, you are safe now. Walk them home and call the doctor. Yes, sir. After the Marquis' order, the servants slowly escorted Gelda and the child home. But the Marquis looked at Dylan with a cold gaze and said, Why did you do this? You must not make noise in the tower without my permission. Forgot? Dylan made a deep bow and apologized. I'm sorry. The situation seemed pretty dire, so I hurried and didn't think about it. Since when did you start getting paid for things like that? The Marquis asked with a rude tone. Moranhites granted the Teutonic Knights their freedom in exchange for one thing, unconditional loyalty. However, if we had gone out to search even a little later, we might not have made it in time. The Marquis turned around and began to go about his business. From now on, do these things yourself. Of course, my lord. I'll be in trouble when the captain finds out about this. But I felt I had to tell you, sir, because it looked as if the woman who looks towards the village every night, having lost her child, would have broken into pieces. Even a knight finds it difficult to overcome the mountains of Altas in the night. If it weren't for the Marquis, the child would not have survived. Meanwhile, the Marquis had already returned to the tower in high spirits. And he looked at Claire with a grin, but Claire was all exhausted and angry. The Marquis could not resist and said, What a terrible sight. Claire raised her head and said firmly, Untie me now. I'll go find the Finn. But the Marquis did not listen to her, and just quietly sat down. If I had known that this was such a funny show, I would have stayed here rather than go looking for your child. After which the Marquis untied her, and she attacked him with questions. Have you found it? Have you found my boy? Is Finn okay? Claire almost went crazy and was very worried about Finn. She almost climbed onto the Marquis's head with her questions. Is Finn injured? But instead of making her happy, He just watched. All she had to do was just wait meekly for a few hours. Please answer, is my child okay? Claire couldn't get through to the answer. Your recklessness infuriates me. As the owner of this land, it is my responsibility to ensure the safety of the child. But she continues to provoke that barbaric side of me that I managed to suppress. Well, he wasn't eaten by the wolves after all, so stop shaking. That's why I keep saying such cruel things. After which he approached Claire and wanted to continue the night. What does it mean? Claire asked. Who cares if he dies? The Marquise answered rudely. You know, we spend every night together. So if you need another child to take care of, just say so. But to the surprise of the Marquise, Claire could not resist, and pushing the Marquise aside, gave him a slap in the face. Shut your filthy mouth. Although Claire was confident in all her actions, she trembled terribly. A large red mark was left on the Marquise's cheek. The Marquis smiled a little and moved his head away and thought about what to do with Claire. Claire calmed down a little and felt incredible coldness from the Marquise. I've completely lost my mind. I can't believe I hit Marquis in the face. What if he hurts my family? She wanted to apologize to the Marquise, but she was so frightened that she could not put two words together. Mr. Just me. But the Marquise was very amused by this. He had already forgotten about the slap. He was just enjoying the process. He looked into her frightened eyes and thought, is she afraid now? How absurd. But still, the Marquis stood up, turned around, and left. Satisfied with the irony, because she is the only one who looks down on the Marquise, he came out of the room and told his servant, I return to the main castle. Prepare your horse. No, I'll take a walk. He walked proudly down the corridor, replaying today's situation in his head, and suddenly he was plunged into his memories. The first time I killed a person was when I was only 13 years old. After the death of an assassin from the overthrown empire who entered the tower, I realized that I, too, am a killer who enjoys the sight of blood. After what happened, my father sent me to the battlefield early to ease my brutal instincts. He also worked hard to teach me to control myself. The Marquis was confused and thought, however, it looks like I'm on the verge of a breakdown now. Liberate the tower tomorrow. Then what should I do with a woman, sir? Make sure she doesn't catch my eye. The next day, near the river, all the maids were washing clothes. And of course, while doing laundry, the maids whispered to each other, have you heard? Yesterday's preparations were not due to the Marquise leaving on a hike. What? But didn't a nightly detachment accompany him? I heard that he just went hunting. Hunting? Why so suddenly? I'm sure to annoy the Archduke for sure. This makes sense. I think he's looking forward to the Marquis right now. And of course, when Claire was washing clothes, she also heard everything. I pray that the Marquis does not become the son-in-law of this greedy Archduke. Exactly. As I remember the time spent in Poussin, I still cringe. However, it is true that there is no suitable noble lady for him right now, and Marcus is not particularly looking for meetings with women. But he accepted the woman in the tower. And then the maids saw Claire, and abruptly all fell silent. She was recently kicked out. What? Claire constantly felt eyes on the back of her head. She was very uncomfortable. She's too young to be a mother. I thought she would hold out for a long time, because the Marquise gave her a tower. But apparently, I was mistaken. You could immediately tell that she was as thin as a stick. I'm sure he didn't like it. The maids teased and laughed at Claire in every possible way, but he should have kicked her out as soon as her leg healed. I agree that it was cruel on his part. A strong wind blew, and Claire sighed heavily and held her head. How hard. Several days have passed since that night. After that incident, the Marquise left the castle to hunt, and I left the tower to get to work. Somewhere in the castle itself. Well, it's good that he continues to support my family. There was a hubbub in the castle, because all the maids were cleaning and whispering at the same time. But since I have to stay in the servants' quarters, I cannot live with them. As Claire walked past the other maids, she felt many eyes on her. But fortunately, Claire is already accustomed to such views. After some time, the head maid handed out the task. Attention! While the Marquis is away, we will clean up the third floor of the main castle. Please return to your assigned areas. Yes, ma'am. After which she walked up to Claire and said, you can remove the corner corridors. Yes, ma'am. Some people feel sorry for me after hearing what happened to me, so they are kind. With a leg like this, the easiest task for me would be to wind the floors. Now that the daily pressure has appeared, I have no time left to worry. She diligently washed the floor and thought, well, Finn is back safe and that's all I need. Only after meeting with Aunt Gelda did I find out that the Marquis was the one who found the Finn. But then he was so cruel to me, and she remembered what her aunt told her. By the way, Marquis saved Finn. This news greatly shocked Claire, and then she wondered, then why didn't he tell me? He should be a great warrior of the Empire, so why did he allow me to hit himself? I was so unrestrained that after I slapped him, I thought I was going to die. I can't believe I was scared after I hit him because I thought he would kill me. I must have looked pathetic. Well, it doesn't matter, because I won't see this person again, she said with a smile on her face. But then this thought bothered her very much, and her smile disappeared somewhere. And so that bad thoughts would not enter her head, she continued to work diligently scrubbing the floor. Everything is for the better. I have a lot of work to do, and no one bothers me at night. So calm. And while she was trying to forget herself and muttering something under her breath, her gaze shifted to something. It was an amazingly beautiful and at the same time enchanting picture. Claire couldn't take her eyes off this picture. The picture seemed to hypnotize her. Wait a minute, isn't this man? And while she was enjoying the picture on her knees, someone approached her. She turned around and was surprised to see a Schwawen in front of her. Schwawen approached her and asked, "Who sent you here?" A nobleman who can easily move around the castle means he is part of the Marquis's close circle. Why is he looking at me like that? I was only tasked with cleaning the floors here. After an awkward pause and the realization that she said something wrong, she thought, oops, looks like I said something wrong. Sorry. I must have been in the wrong hallway. Clearly Jake isn't here. Maids are not allowed here. Remember this well. And then he saw that Claire had something wrong with her leg. Injured your leg? What? No, it's okay. After which he closed his eyes to her mistake and said, You don't have to rush. Be careful. Claire was in no hurry to leave and asked, Sorry, the portrait must be of the Ringen emperors? And it's true, the very first ruler of the empire, Emperor Ringen. It looks different than the drawing I saw in the book. Well, yes, it's logical, because no one will try to write books intended for common people. What kind of book? After Claire answered, his face changed. History of the continent Rashman. His biography was described very sparingly. Do you mean the book written by the overthrowers? Have you read it? Well, yes, of course. In any case, these overthrown are only uncouth scoundrels. Scoundrels? He didn't understand what she was talking about. Looking at this portrait, Claire said. In this book, he was described as an ordinary groom. Schwaben was puzzled. How could a simple maid read such a book? This maid is so strange, he thought. So he decided to ask again. Are you sure you read this history book? And then Claire realized that she had blurted out too much and said, No, sir, I was wrong. And before he had time to come to his senses, she collected all her rags and quickly left. Now he was even more puzzled. Ran away to avoid the topic? She also dropped a rag. And yet he was tormented by only one question, and he couldn't get it out of his head. A maid who can read? The past Marquis, Lord Nurburk, liked to say that Emperor Ringen wanted to create a world where even commoners could read. A world where everyone who wanted to learn would receive an education. Yes, this was our dream. Create such a world, but time has passed, Martel. You left this world, and the Paratorian family became mired in corruption. So, while I live in this world, I simply have to make Bolta the next emperor. I will make any sacrifices in the name of our dreams. Just like you. Bolt has always been special. I think he will be a wonderful ruler. And he plunged into his memories. They turned the emperor into an ordinary groom. Godfather, look! These scoundrels really hate Emperor Ringen. Remembering this, I realized that the maid said the same thing. They are amazingly similar. Meanwhile, somewhere in the maid's bedroom, Claire tossed around and still couldn't fall asleep. Although her neighbor was already fast asleep, she jumped out of bed, grabbed her head and said, I don't think I'll get enough sleep today. And in order not to disturb the others from sleeping, she decided to leave the bedroom. And with small steps, she walked along the corridor. There was silence in the castle. There was no one. absolute silence and tranquility. She couldn't walk for long with such a leg, so she decided to sit down on the steps. A castle without a master, so quiet, she said with a smile, after which she bowed her head and thought, here one gets a little better. To be honest, on days like these I miss my time in the tower. I miss being able to read books in the library at night. How stupid. I dreamed so much about a family only because I couldn't imagine what it would be like to live completely alone. And now I already miss the quiet life in the tower, although just a few days have passed. And suddenly, to her surprise, in the middle of the night, the castle doors slowly opened. She was so scared that she didn't even move. When the doors opened, the light of the full moon, which illuminated all living things that night, fell on Claire. It was the Marquis. Suddenly, he returned in the middle of the night. Claire was very surprised and did not expect to see him here. But the Marquis didn't care about her and said, I see there's a rat here. Without thinking twice, she jumped up, bowed, and said, I didn't know that you would arrive at midnight. I'll call the servants to serve you. But the Marquis didn't even pay attention to her and simply walked past. As if she didn't exist or she was some kind of ghost, he walked past her without even saying anything. And he slowly began to climb the steps. Claire kept trembling with fear and excitement and thought, apparently, he really lost interest in me, and I thought that now he would definitely kill me. That's good. But why then is my heart so heavy? The Marquis's behavior of ignoring him really hurt Claire. The next day, like all the maids, she cleaned the skins near the river. When the Marquis and the knightly order returned from the hunt, my work noticeably increased. Deer, bears, even wild boar have so many skins to clean. How many days have we been doing this? There is no end to these stupid skins, but we need to wash them before they go bad. If you are tired, ask someone to relieve you. Yes, cleaning animal skins is very, very difficult. Lord God, a few days ago you were so glad that the Marquis had finally returned. I'm even glad that I finally have something to do. When I met him after so long, the first thing I felt was fear. I was sure that he would kill me right here and now. Now, realizing how pitiful I looked when faced with death, all I can do is plow for the sake of survival. I also can't help but think about how I felt then. I'm sure my heart was ready to jump out of my chest, just because my pride was wounded. Stop being distracted. We have to work. While Claire was dreaming about her own, Aunt Gelda came out of nowhere. Claire, Auntie, why are you here again? Auntie's anger knew no bounds. I told you not to go out today, didn't I? Your body can't handle processing these skins for so many days in a row. But there's nothing to do inside. Be silent. Lord, look how terrible you look. And get that stupid headscarf off your head. And the maids, having heard Aunt Gelda's curses, began to whisper to each other. Who is this? Don't you know? She is the same abandoned one from the tower. Gelda led Claire to the water to wash her. Auntie, I'm all wet. This is what I was trying to achieve. I brought you new things, so wash yourself already. God, my whole face is covered in dirt. Gelda was very worried about Claire. Didn't I tell you to sit inside yesterday? But how can I relax when everyone around me is busy working? My leg has already healed, so it's awkward for me to chill out like this. Exactly. But what about the children? I'm sure the boys are already playing somewhere, and Mrs. Revia is taking care of Rudia. Lower your head and let me rinse your neck. By the way, does Mrs. Ravia have any trouble visiting the estate? Because if the Marquis finds out... And before Claire had time to speak, Gelda interrupted her. Yes, the Marquis called her palace, but he didn't indicate the exact time when it would be time for her to leave. So for now, everything seems to be fine. Don't worry about it. It seems to me that even the most callous man would not dare to intimidate the nanny who raised him from the cradle. I told you to choose Slava. What if someone hears? Who cares? After a few minutes of such conversations, Claire put her things away and went to wash herself properly. She let down her long, luxurious hair and lay down on her aunt's lap. Gelda gently and carefully washed and combed Claire's hair. When she undressed, she noticed that the bruises were gone. The last trace left by the Marquis also disappeared. Now I completely feel that it has been cleansed, but the eyes are still blue. Auntie likes their color, because my mother had the same one. Only I hate him. This noticeable blue color did nothing but provoke trouble. By the way, we also had to flee Puisine because of my eyes. One evil knight constantly mocked me because of this blue color. And one day Endon, quite tired of this, beat him until he bled. Then we had to flee from the knights and hide in Geneva. Am I also in the Marquise because of the color of my eyes? This thought haunted Claire. Throughout my life, I have suffered a lot of bullying from many dispolitical men. Why was I so reckless? But I continued to secretly hope that the Marquise, recognized as an unsurpassed warrior of the Empire, would be different from other nobles. The Margraves are the only heroes left in the Empire. Endian, that son of a dog. Because of his constant exaggerations, my expectations were higher than the highest mountains. To see him again, I want to rip out all his hair. Yes. I think still, you shouldn't constantly blame others. It's just my mistake that I was always naive, even in stalemate situations. It's all over, it's time to forget. And also to get rid of the strange feeling that visited me last night. Gelda noticed that something was wrong and asked, "What's happened? Are you feeling bad?" But Claire just shook her head. "Auntie, do you still think that I am the most beautiful child in the world?" Claire asked quietly and uncertainly, but Gelda gently stroked her head and said, "Certainly, look how charming you are." She held her close and said in a calm and gentle tone, "You are the most dazzling girl in the whole world." Claire liked it so much that she lay down on her aunt's lap and said, "Say it again, please." "Claire, you are the most charming girl in the whole world." But suddenly, out of nowhere, someone closely watched Claire and Gelda from the side. It was the Marquise. As always, with a cold gaze, peeking out from behind the bushes, he carefully watched Claire. But then Max came up to him and asked, "Hey, Bolt, I thought you went to wash your face. Why did you stop?" "What? Are the maids having fun in the water?" After which Max laughed hard and said, "You're such a pervert." Nodding his head a little, he added, "From the back, she's really okay." But the Marquise turned to him and immediately answered coldly and rudely, "Close your eyes, until I give you permission to open them. Meanwhile, somewhere in the kingdom, how many more times will this happen?" After these words, the glass that flew against the wall shattered. "Why should we tolerate these vile pirates?" "Please calm down, your lordship. We were accompanied by the navy, so how did they manage to besiege us again?" The servants stood in bewilderment and were very confused. "Useless dogs! What were you thinking?" And then one of the butlers said, "You can seek the help of the Marquise to find a solution to the problem, your grace." "Yes, it's true. The Marquise will soon become your son-in-law, so protecting your lands is his responsibility. Moreover, it is his direct duty to protect the borders of the empire. And our merchant ships continue to be attacked due to the fact that the Marquise does not fulfill his duties." "Yes, indeed. It's all this arrogant bastard's fault. Bring him to Langtheu, now!" Meanwhile, somewhere in the castle, Claire walked along the corridors of the castle, holding a bucket with a rag in her hands, and was all glowing with happiness. Her eyes were filled with enthusiasm. "Looks like luck is on my side. I can't believe I got the chance to visit the third floor so soon. Oh my God, I forgot to clean the third floor hallway." When Claire heard this, she immediately raised her hand and said, "I can go and clean it up." She must have forgotten about this, because the work increased greatly after the Marquise returned from the hunt. For me, this is a good opportunity in every sense. Thanks to this, I can look at this portrait again. She was fascinated by the portrait and could not take her eyes off it. And while she silently looked at the portrait and admired this masterpiece, suddenly someone approached her. It was the Marquis. He quietly and carefully watched Claire. At first, he didn't even understand what she was doing. He looked at her and thought with a smirk on his face, "At first, I thought that my peace was disturbed by a couple of rats running past." Then he began to think about how to punish this unlucky maid. But after that, the Marquise pulled back the curtains and was very surprised. He saw how beautiful Claire's smile is and how beautifully she knows how to smile. But she didn't even notice the Marquis and continued to admire the painting. "How beautiful this picture is. But I had no idea that this woman could smile so radiantly." As I expected, she likes men like him. Then she can't even take her eyes off him. She doesn't even realize that I'm standing right behind her. Meanwhile, she still looked at the picture without looking away, and even blushed a little. Her eyes were filled with happiness. The Marquise was interested in watching her, and simply stood silently behind her. The face of the X-ray Emperor is especially infuriating today. After which, the Marquise noticed how Claire slowly began to approach the painting closer and closer. It was as if she wanted to touch the painting, but suddenly she timidly took her hand away from the picture and thought, "No, this is not something that I am allowed to touch." The Marquise was very infuriated by this, and with a smirk on his face, he thought, was it permissible to slap me on the cheek? And now she can't even touch a piece of fabric. The Marquise could no longer stand it. Why is she just staring at him for so long? She can't even look at the portrait in full because it hangs too close. Even in this situation, it looks as stupid as possible. This was the last straw of the Marquis, and he could not stand it and began to approach her. For the effect of surprise, he suddenly grabbed her shoulder and said, "Looks like he's your type." He gently pressed her to him and added, "If you want to look at the whole picture, it would be better to take a couple of steps back." Claire did not expect to see the Marquis here and was simply shocked. But still, she moved away from him and asked, "Marquis Mohrenheitz, why are you here? When choosing between the two of us, isn't this a question worth asking you?" Claire couldn't answer, and she didn't have anything to add either. So she simply and humiliatingly looked away from the Marquis. But he continued to stare at her, afraid of me as always. It's just a portrait, but it infuriates me how admiringly she looks at this man. And now, she can't even raise her head and look at me. Actually, I was going to visit Poissy after returning from hunting. If only I hadn't looked again into those eyes that shine brighter than the starry sky. I would have already crossed the border to Geneva. You dress in these shabby rags and do what the other maids do. But to this day, you only attract my attention to you. My eyes are always looking for only this woman in the crowd. After an awkward pause, Claire said in a trembling voice, "I came here only because I need to clean the third floor. I didn't want to seem suspicious. Strange. I didn't see you on your knees with a rag in your hands." After this phrase, Claire lost all confidence again and lowered her gaze. So awkward. He is dressed in a beautiful formal attire, while I am in a simple maid's dress. I always feel stupid around him. After which she again plucked up courage, bowed deeply and said, "Sorry to interrupt your vacation. I'll leave right now. Yes, I'm nobody. A weakling who cannot even go where she would like. But why do his words make you feel so worthless?" While Claire hung her head and waited for an answer, the Marquis, as always, answered with a cold gaze. "Raise your head. From this place, the portrait is perfectly visible." To Claire's surprise, the Marquis did not scold her, but rather dragged her towards the portrait. Claire was completely bewildered. "I know you have a soft spot for Emperor Ringen, but I can't believe you came here just to look at the portrait. I must admit, you are quite decisive." "I came because I need to wash the floors." But the Marquis did not listen to her and asked, "What about your ankle? Did you cure her?" "Yes, it is completely healed." The Marquis suspected that his leg was still sore, but Claire sensed it and quickly responded, "It doesn't hurt anymore, at all. Even though you haven't worked for a long time, you look much thinner than before." "Thought you got the help you needed," Claire thought. Can he worry about what happened? But the Marquis added, "This is the reason why I sent Rabia to the estate. But I'm sure these children's cheeks have become even rounder." After this phrase, Claire's heart began to beat faster, and she blushed a little. "I thought he forgot about my existence. My soul is restless again." Marquis didn't expect this, but Claire took his sleeve and said, "Thank you, that they saved my fin." Claire was a little embarrassed by the Marquis, and turning his head away, he answered, "I wouldn't say that I saved him. I was just passing by and noticed." But Claire didn't care. She looked him straight in the eyes and spoke sincerely. "Still, I want to thank you." But Claire hadn't expressed everything yet and said it in an awkward voice. "And please forgive me." While Claire timidly held his sleeve, the Marquise did not understand what they were talking about and asked, "Forgive for what?" "I'm talking about the slap." "Of course I did it because you said what they should have said, so I got angry. But I still regret what happened. I didn't know it was you who found Finn, sir. You didn't tell people that you hit me, did you?" "No, of course not. It's true that I slapped you, but I didn't tell anyone anything, I swear." So, even if she told someone, no one would believe it. "I decided to forget about it, so you should also erase this incident from your memory." Claire was very worried and approached the Marquise and asked, "But weren't you angry that I hit you? I just think it was a little unfair to me, too." But the Marquise didn't care what Claire said. He was tormented by only one question. Why is this woman acting so strange today? She usually answered my questions in monosyllables and avoided eye contact in every possible way. So strange. If you had said then that you were the one who found Finn, I would never have done that. If only they had not tied me up and left me like a barbarian. The Marquise could no longer listen to Claire's chatter and simply silently walked up to her, gently hugged her, and said, "You apologize as if I should forgive you and return you to the tower." And biting her ear, he spoke in a whisper. "Is this what you want, Claire?" But Claire did not succumb to the Marquis's provocation and abruptly pushed him away from her. "This is wrong." Claire was very upset by the behavior of the Marquise and thought, well, what kind of person? What was I hoping for when I started talking to this arrogant man? Yes, I haven't slept well the last few days, so I've gone off the rails. After which she turned around and began to leave. Why are you trying to escape in the middle of a conversation? You don't understand at all what I want to say. You don't understand at all. After which she fell to her knees, took a rag in her hands, moistened it with water, and diligently began to wash the floor. But the Marquise just silently watched Claire with a grin on his face. To some extent, this even turned Marquis on. Claire was very ashamed of her behavior, and she thought, I understand that I shouldn't behave like that in a situation like this. I have to crawl on my knees in front of him and thank him like I have never thanked anyone, as befits a woman who was imprisoned in a tower to behave. But I can't do that. Claire realized that she had a completely different character and would never do that. While Claire was struggling with her emotions and diligently washing the floor, the Marquise slowly began to approach her. I'm overwhelmed by emotions. I just need to calm down and put them aside. How dare he? Who would want to return to a place like this? And suddenly, due to the fact that Claire could not overcome her anger, in a fit of her emotions, she accidentally touched a bucket of water. And of course it turned over and Claire was all wet. She continued to kneel in the puddle. It feels like he already knew about my feelings, even before I confessed everything. But suddenly, the Marquis came up from behind, grabbed her hand, and shouted, Claire, what are you doing? If you have something to say, look me in the eye and say, damn it. Do I look like the kind of person who will always cater to your whims? Claire moved the Marquis's hand away from her, bowed, and said, I'm just trying to thank you. Thank you for saving Finn, and forgive me for being too rash and rude. That's what I wanted to say. And this, damn it, doesn't mean that I want to go back to the tower and roll in the hay with you. She released all her steam, clenched her hand into a fist, and thought, now I don't care. I was born with this disgusting character. So if I die because of him, then that's how it should be. What woman in this world would want to live like that? Such a shameful life? This is no better than being born an animal. These words made the Marquise's cheekbones ache with anger. Enough! The Marquise could no longer tolerate this, and in order to shut up Claire, he abruptly threw her to the ground. Claire's delicate hair, as always, was disheveled from this. The Marquise began to move his hand towards Claire's hips and asked, Is it better to be born an animal? He lifted her dress, grabbed her leg, and asked, gently stroking her, Do you want to see a real beast? Well, yes. The Marquis always behaves this way when things don't go according to his plan. Previously, if I found myself in a similar situation, I would have been scared. But this will not happen again. After which, she grabbed the Marquis by the collar, pressed him to her, and kissed him passionately. She seemed to pounce on him. They continued kissing passionately and lightly biting each other. They bit each other to the point that they gave each other small wounds. Then, with a small smirk on her face and a cut on her lip, Claire said, I will no longer indulge your temptations. But the Marquis only wiped the blood on his lip and answered, Yes, only for it. Finally, I can feel like a true animal. The Marquis grabbed her leg and began to bite her, starting from the knee. After these passionate kisses, they both took off their capes. The Marquis picked up Claire and kissed her breasts and tightly squeezed her buttocks. They seemed to merge into one and forget about all their problems. They were so close that in the process, Claire heard Marquise begin to feel a little short of breath. Claire was a little amused by this and said with a smirk on her face, What's happened? Already have shortness of breath? Can't be. Great Marquis. Tired already? How so? The Marquise was very excited by this, and like a wild animal, he attacked Claire. And she, in turn, scratched his entire back from this. And suddenly, when the Marquis and Claire were enjoying each other, someone approached them and they were noticed. It was the headmaid. She didn't expect to see them here. How? How could this happen? I came here because dawn was approaching, and she still did not return. I don't understand how this could even happen. While the maid was racking her brains about how such a situation could even happen, the Marquis approached her and said, I noticed that the rats in this palace are multiplying and multiplying. The Marquis stood in front of her with a wound on his lip and abrasions on his neck. And Claire was already sleeping soundly, and he wrapped her in a blanket so that she wouldn't catch a cold. He carefully handed it to the maid and said, Take care of her. Yes, sure. The maid put Claire on the floor and tried to bring her to her senses. Claire, my girl, wake up. But before leaving, the Marquis said, Inform the butler that in 2 days early in the morning we will leave for Langtheu. The next day, Gomon was standing on the street and everyone was busy with something. And meanwhile Jake entered the castle. And everyone was just happy for him and shouted, Lord Keynes, you are back! Nice to see you, sir. Even though I've been away from here for so long, it seems like I won't have time to rest. He had been putting off this trip for so long. I can't believe I still made the decision to go so soon. He knocked on the Marquis's office and said, Mister, this is Jake. The Marquis, deciding matters, answered, Sign in. The Marquis sat in his chair and said, while working on important papers, It's been a long time since our last meeting. Hello, sir. I myself didn't expect to be bogged down in business for so long. Have you found the right owner to manage your family's home? Yes. Finally able to delegate my responsibilities for maintaining lands and university business to a trusted person. The Marquis beamed at this news and asked, And who is this confidant? An experienced and extremely altruistic person. He excelled in architecture and even took an active part in the reconstruction of the monastery in Solz. And this trusted person sent a request to send a large number of clerks from Voldor to the monastery. Aren't those already sent enough? Oh, I almost forgot. Unfortunately, half of the clerks in the monastery suffer from food poisoning. They need at least 10 people to complete and publish the book in honor of the university's founding day. What do you order me to do? Well, you can send the number of people you need, Jake. Yes, sir. And then Jake remembered the Count's words. And we don't have enough gun here, so what? Send more? If the Count finds out, he will definitely go crazy with anger. By the way, I'm going to take that woman with me, the Marquis said joyfully. Jake was perplexed. What? Do you mean Lady Claire? Where to take it? While Jake was annoying the Marquise with his questions, he simply silently watched her from the window. And Jake asked in a trembling voice, You don't want to take her to the Langtu festival, do you? But the Marquis just smiled and said, Include her in the official list without her knowing about it. I'm counting on you. After this, Jake had even more questions, but he still could not resist the orders of the Marquise. What are you planning, sir? Meanwhile, the maids were loading the carts and fussing terribly. My spine will soon break from these weights. Well, it's a big holiday, so it's no surprise that there are so many things. But suddenly, the attention of the sweaty and out-of-breath maids turned to Claire. She sat awkwardly on the steps while stitching something. She asked, Is there still as much work? But suddenly, someone from behind grabbed her shoulder and said, I can help. Sit. It was the headmaid, and she said with a smile on her face, I'll give you time to rest, but don't stay cold for too long. After which, all the maids ran sharply and quickly for a break. Hooray! Let's go have a snack in the kitchen. But Claire remained seated, and the headmaid sat down next to her. I was so tired. I thought I was going to die right here. But Claire didn't even intend to leave and just silently watched the others. And Claire's boss noticed her strange behavior. And suddenly she said, You look like you're not happy about the break. Everyone knows that you are different from others here. Claire was very hurt by this and asked with a smirk on her face, Different, you say? We dress in the same shabby clothes, do the same work, eat the same meals. So what's the difference? This thought made Claire feel uncomfortable. And the maid, understanding that what she blurted out was not what she meant, answered in a panic. Sorry, that's not what I meant. You just have reasons to get tired faster, Claire. Like what happened last night, for example. And Claire remembered how she helped her then. Thank you for your help. Without you, I wouldn't even be able to wash myself. Of course, she helps me because of what she saw. But the maid took Claire's hand and said, There is no reason to do good to me. We need to help each other. But I am ashamed of that incident. It's hard to raise children alone, isn't it? This phrase struck Claire very much. She opened her eyes wider and asked, Sorry, what did you say? My husband was taken to the front, and during the war he was killed. So I had to raise my daughter alone. She left this world due to the spread of the epidemic. Therefore, I perfectly understand your situation, fatigue, and what it's like to raise children alone. I also understand that the widow doesn't have much of a choice. After these words, Claire's eyes seemed to shine, and she caught herself thinking that this was the first time that someone other than Aunt Gelda had said something like that to her. After these touching words, she decided to change the topic. No point. I understand how cruel the Marquis is. How can he satisfy needs in such a dirty way, forcing someone to do it for him? Claire was a little daydreaming about the maid's words. Isn't that right, Claire? Made her think about it, after which all sorts of dirty thoughts entered her head, and she blushed. And in the end, she couldn't stand it. She jumped up sharply and said, I need to get some fresh air. She forgot about all her work and ran into the forest. Running through the forest, she was very nervous and lost in thought. Looks like I'm going crazy. Not only that, last night I pressed my naked body against the Marquise and moaned shamelessly. I think about it again and again and want it. I'm definitely crazy. We need to escape from this damned place as soon as possible. But suddenly, her heart began to beat faster and faster, and she thought, I'll be with myself again when I escape this cage. Yes, when the Marquis leaves for the festival, I will not meet him again. Just the thought of it made her very sad. Let go of feelings. Everything will work out. While she was struggling with herself, a scream suddenly came from behind her. Lady Claire! Mr. Keans! You're back. I apologize for interrupting your walk, but the Marquis asked me to tell you something. He wants you to accompany him to the Langtu party, Lady Claire. This news shocked her very much. She did not expect the Marquis to make such a decision. After which, Claire confidently and decisively turned around and walked into the castle. Along the way, she muttered to herself, This is some kind of nonsense. This man has lost his mind. She burst into Jake's office and began wiping something with her rag. Jake, in turn, was perplexed and spoke. Lady Claire, why are you barging into my office like that? And why a cook? How do you imagine a maid without a rag in her hands? Sorry, what did you say? Maid? Jake began to have more and more questions. And then, from this stream of unexpected information, Jake grabbed his head and said, You don't have to do this. We're leaving soon, so you need to get ready too, Lady Claire. But Claire didn't take Jake's words seriously. And she said with a grin on her face, What does it mean to gather? Prepare your dress for the reception? That's right. I'm just a servant of the Marquis of Mornheights. Are you afraid that you'll piss him off? The fact that he suddenly decided to take me on such a long trip. Does this mean that he wants to introduce me to other nobles? Jake wanted to tell her something, but she didn't even let him open his mouth. Apparently, it looks like I'm venting my anger for no reason, and he is the only man who calls me by name, and also adds lady, and he treats me with at least some respect. But after which, Jake could not stand it, and explained the whole situation to her. Lady Claire! But he's not like that. Marquise is not one of those. Besides this, he asked me to prepare you so that no one would know. But she couldn't believe Jake's words. Is this really all for me? But then Claire said, I visit his bedroom too often, so I doubt anyone will suspect anything. These words embarrassed Jake very much. Or do you want to put armor on me and present me as a knight? Is it worth contacting me in this way in order to calm your gentleman's conscience? But suddenly, the doors to Jake's office suddenly opened, followed by a scream. Baron Keans, is it true that more than 10 clerks were sent to Soltz? It was an angry and rabid Schwawen. He was furious and confused. Have you gone completely crazy? She screamed. After that, without noticing Claire herself, they began to argue. This means that there will not be enough clerks in Voldor to write reports and letters. But they are really needed in the Soltz, so I can't do anything about it. But this does not mean that you can take the most worthy of them. Tomorrow is a big holiday, and we don't have anyone who can write important and official letters. And this damn Max, why doesn't he still learn Latin? Claire looked at it all from the outside and thought, I believe this man is Count Aaron Chavin. He is the head of the second most influential family in Geneva, after the Mornheights, and his son Max is captain of the Order of Knighthood. In addition, the Count of Chavin is the Chancellor of Geneva and a close friend of the previous Marquise. He is so powerful that he even managed to become the son-in-law of the previous Marquise. The stories I've heard from other maids could be very helpful. We have already prepared the required number of scribes to prepare for the festival, so please do not worry. But they are all too bad. And Jake and Chavin continued to argue. But Claire was not going to listen to their argument and said, I'm sorry. Are you looking for someone who can translate from Latin to Frankish? Chavin walked up to Claire, squinted his eyes closely and said, Don't you think we've already met somewhere? But Claire felt a little awkward, and she thought, apparently he didn't even notice me. But after a few seconds of thought, the Chavin remembered her. Are you the maid with the injured leg? And after that, Claire was very happy. So he still remembers me. And suddenly, to the surprise of the Chavin, Claire said, I can read Latin. I can also write in Latin and translate into Frankish. So can I help you? Chavin was very surprised and asked, Can you read and translate Latin? And Dare answered without a doubt, Yes, Count Chavin. But suddenly, Jake stood between them and said, No, stop! You shouldn't get involved in these matters, Lady Claire. Why? Don't you need help? Claire was very upset and angry, but the Chavin was not going to listen to Jake and asked, Baron Kians, who is this maid? Jake fussed a little and didn't know how to say it correctly. Well, this is the lady from the tower. After this, the Chavin was very surprised and could not believe Jake's words. Lady from the tower? You say this child is Lady Marquise? Yes, that's why she can't help. We cannot involve a woman in writing. After which, Claire became convinced that no one was happy to see her here. And she thought with a grin on her face, well, he pretended to respect me, but in reality, he was just as conservative a worm as everyone else here. But Claire is not so easy to break. She sat down in the chair and said with a joyful expression, Since you doubt it so much, why not test my skills, Count Chavin? Jake was at a loss and didn't know what to do, but the Count liked this attitude and responded, And I like it. Well, let's begin. After which, Claire immediately took up her pen and got to work. First, I will translate from Frankish to Latin. In the process, she noticed one detail. Judging by this elegant and neat handwriting, this must be a permit written by the Marquis himself. After some time, she finished and handed over her work to the Count. I'm done. The Count looked at her translation and answered in surprise. So you didn't lie when you said that you read a book on the history of Rashomon. I thought she was exaggerating her literary abilities, but in reality, she can do almost nothing. But the grammar, translation, and even handwriting are impressive. She can even compete with the best scribe on the continent. But suddenly, Chavin said something that made Claire shudder. But Latin is a forbidden language. Even translation from it is punishable. So, only if you are not a priest. It is unlikely that a commoner could comprehend this language. If it turns out that a commoner excelled in literature, and even in Latin, most nobles would consider her a witch or suffering from some kind of plague. You should have listened to Aunt Gelda and kept quiet about your abilities. To Claire's surprise, the Count asked a very interesting question. Where did you learn this? Is there some kind of school for commoners where they teach reading and writing or something? No, I just read a lot of books when I was a child. The Count grinned and answered, Really? You are extremely talented. I thought he would be angry that I was actually gifted because I was a woman. And he is more intelligent than I thought. Graf walked up to Claire and said, Well, would you like to become a clerk? But suddenly, a confused Jake intervened in their conversation. Count Chavin as you can. If people find out, Volador will lose all authority. But he didn't care and answered, But won't the lack of talented people ultimately lead to this? Become a clerk instead of the tower lady. And then Claire said something that made the Count and Jake pay attention. Some time later, departure day. The Marquis and his knights were sitting on a horse, and the crowd was shouting after him, Have a nice trip. Be careful, knights. And among all this crowd, Claire stood mysteriously in a black cape. "We will pray that every priest will return home too." She was determined and self-confident, and nothing could interfere with her plans. She was clearly up to something big. Everyone admired the Marquis and could not take their eyes off him. And the Marquis himself was incredibly serious and responsible. And meanwhile, the Chavien was watching him from the window. "People go crazy just by looking at our Marquis. It seems you are worried about the upcoming meeting between our Marquis and the Archduke. This doesn't sound like you, sir. Of course, I like that he has to meet this poison. But this meeting promises great benefits, so we have no choice." "What do you mean by great benefit?" "I think you know that the empire is in decline. The next emperor of Ringen left our world, and the nobles take everything they can into their own hands, while the poor become poor every day. Discontent is growing, and doubts about the legitimate rule of the imperial family are intensifying. Are they really the descendants of our heroic emperor, since they keep the entire empire in fear and pain? The heyday of the empire passed away with the last emperor. And what will happen if our Marquis appears in such a terrible time as a bolt from the blue? He will lead our warriors to victory, eclipsing the radiance of the glory of his predecessor. The appearance of a talented military leader who is able to protect the borders of the country will remind the inhabitants of the empire that he is not only the grandson of a famous hero, but also Bolt Morenheitz, the great lion. The history of our empire is too short, since it is based only on the activities of 2 generations. And in order to maintain power, the imperial family needs a turn of unreal proportions. If someone from the Ringen couple appears, people will support this person. These words made Jake doubt, and he said, "Really? You're right. Bolt's rise to the throne is inevitable. This will happen when the imperial princess passes into another world." "Wait! But why did you send Lady Claire to accompany the Marquis on such an important trip? Are you still thinking about it? But won't people think that our Marquise was seduced by a witch?" "What did you say? Witch?" "Indeed, she has such talents that you can calmly call her that." In half a day, she remembered all the rules of grammar. "We cannot miss such a gift. Jake has already lost all hope of convincing the Count. How long are you going to keep her as a priest? But this is the easiest way. We can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. In the past generation, women were more capable than men. For example, Empress Bertha and Marquis Oberto, who played a huge role in the structure of the country. This once again confirms that we cannot lose such talent in vain. The Count did not listen to Jake at all and continued to tell him his grand plan. "All this will play into our hands. Have you ever wondered how many nobles are trying to offer the Marquis their daughters, ready to jump into his bed? And this woman was able to distract him. If she gets pregnant, we can take an advantageous position and keep her at court. Plus, her 3 children are under our wing, so she will be afraid to betray us. And after all these arguments, do you doubt its necessity for our Marquise?" Meanwhile, the sun had already set, and there were many carts with horses, and Claire was in one of these carts. While everyone was happily talking and laughing, she sat silently in the corner. And while she sat silently, someone turned to her. "Priest Thomas, will you treat yourself?" And he held out some kind of bun. "The road ahead is bumpy. You should refresh yourself." Claire felt a little embarrassed that she was impersonating someone else, and answered in an awkward voice, "No, thank you. I have good health, so everything is fine." "Good, but it could still get worse. By the way, what do you have there?" "You won't let go of this bag." But suddenly, she squeezed this bag even more tightly, turned away from that guy, and said, "Nothing that would interest you." The guy holding the pie in his hand was a little perplexed. She was very nervous, and only bad things came into her head. "They're all crazy. They've all lost their minds. How do they not notice that I am not a priest, and certainly not male? The Count has gone crazy." In the Empire, priests are even allowed to draw up official documents. Moreover, they are conservatives who have lived their entire lives within the walls of a monastery. Having learned that I am a woman, they will not give me peace. The Marquise is the craziest of them all for allowing all this to happen. I still can't wrap my head around the fact that he brought a woman to meet the Archduke, managing to keep everything a secret. After which, her gaze fell on the bag where there were small flasks. Aunt Gelda warned me that if I dye my hair within 5 days, the regrown roots will become noticeable. But we have been on the road for just 5 days. Will I be able to wash myself without anyone noticing? And suddenly, after this, the cart runs over a small stone at full speed, and it flies up a little. Accordingly, Claire was also pushed quite well and hit herself a little. She might even get a bruise because of this. After that, she thought about it. What is more important? Will I even be able to get to the first rest stop safe and sound? Sometime later, late at night, the Marquise and everyone else were still able to reach the rest stop. The Marquise had just gotten off his horse when he was immediately greeted. "Welcome, my lord! You must be tired after a long trip. Thank you for the warm welcome. What are you? It is an honor to host you on the first night of your journey." After which the Marquis's gaze shifted at Claire, who was all in a black robe, climbing out of the cart. "Unfortunately, we don't have many rooms, so the priest will have to spend the night in the barracks," the owner of the estate informed. But Max answered without knowing anything. "Everything is fine. We are also glad that we will not spend the night on the street." After looking at Claire in disguise, the Marquis turned around and said, "Take us inside." Meanwhile, there was total commotion in the castle. Everyone was doing something and setting the table. And on the table, in turn, were the most expensive and rare delicacies. But the Marquis was just sitting in his room, unbuttoning his shirt a little with a glass of wine. He was thinking about his own things. He was very tired from the road. "I've been thinking about that night for a long time. How could a simple female provocation turn heads so much? What kind of indescribable emotions did I experience then?" He remembered how he held her by the waist, and her disheveled hair fluttered across the floor. But they were as alien as they were frightening. "Claire, I was so afraid that you would die by my own hands." This thought haunted him. Holding a glass in his hand and enveloping the wine against its walls, he said, "I can kill her any time I want." This was immediately followed by a loud crash and a scream. How could this happen? The security, of course, reacted sharply to this and opened the doors with words, "Sir, is something wrong?" But he thought with a grin on his face, "That was the first time I experienced the fear of loss. It's funny." Blood flowed from his hand in a stream because of the glass that he broke. But he didn't care about it and decided, "Fine. Since I can't explain those emotions, I need to try to keep it to myself as long as possible." After which, the guards were horrified and screamed, "Sir, your hand!" But the Marquis only licked the blood from his fingers and ordered, "Bring me Priest Thomas, now." The only thing I fully understand is that taking Claire to the Archduke's palace, also secretly, is too stupid a risk. While the Marquis was thinking, in the worst-case scenario, I will have to renounce all claims to the throne, even though they were the main purpose of the trip. The guard near whom Claire was standing turned to him. "Mister, I brought Priest Thomas." And after the words of the Marquis, "You can go." The guard made a deep bow and quickly left. The Marquis, without thinking twice, immediately rushed to her and asked her by the hood, "Why don't you take off this stupid hood?" After which, he immediately took off her hood and again saw her wonderful and bewitching gaze, with no less beautiful and deep eyes. Even though she was dressed like a commoner, the Marquis didn't care. He looked at her as if for the last time. But Claire turned away and asked, "Why did you take me with you?" But the Marquis did not hesitate to answer, and while he was undoing his hair, Claire said, "Well, honestly, I don't know." And because they had not seen each other for a long time, due to the difficult road. So, as not to spoil such a wonderful moment, he rushed at her and kissed her passionately. He kissed her from the tip of her nose to her neck. But Claire is not so blind and noticed that his hand was bandaged. She couldn't take her eyes off the needles in her hand. While hugging her, he suddenly bit her on the neck. But he did not calculate the strength. He overdid it a little. Claire winced a little in pain. The Marquis, feeling that something was wrong, broke the distance a little, looked her straight in the eyes, and said with a serious look, "Concentrate." Claire. She, in turn, blushed and became embarrassed at this phrase. What does he allow himself? In addition, his knight called me in front of everyone. "Priest Thomas. Is Priest Thomas here? The Marquis wants to see you." And then all the people turned their gaze to her. As soon as I arrived, he immediately went in for a kiss. Claire couldn't even catch her breath. What if we get caught? While Marquis and Claire were enjoying each other, suddenly someone knocked on the door. "Mister, this is Chase." After that, a terrible roar was heard outside the door. Chase was a little confused and scared by such a loud sound. But after that, the measured voice of the Marquise was heard. "Sign in." And he slowly opened the doors and said, "I brought the necessary documents." When he opened the doors, he saw Claire all in black sitting at the table, and the Marquise is standing next to him, with his shirt unbuttoned slightly. But Chase said without thinking twice, "Sorry, you and the priest are all at work. I didn't want to disturb you." The Marquise immediately told him, "Leave the papers here on the table." And he carried out the Marquise's order and put the papers on the table. Meanwhile, Claire was very worried and trembling with fear. When he put the papers on the table, he looked closely at Claire. But he did not draw hasty conclusions, and he thought, "What kind of little priest are you?" But he did not focus on this and said, "Rest, sir. You must be tired." While the Marquise was having a nice conversation with Chase, Claire's heart almost jumped out of her chest with excitement. Her heart had never beat so fast. "This man!" He lost his mind. "He didn't let me go, even though we were almost caught." But after a few minutes of talking, Chase said, "Well, I have to go." And he quickly slammed the door and left the room. And as soon as the doors of the room closed, Claire immediately jumped up, took off the hood of her cape, and said, "What the hell were you thinking?" But the Marquise pretended that he did not understand what she was talking about. "What are you talking about?" "I think if I were declassified, it would cause you a lot of problems." But the Marquise answered with a grin on his face, "If I was afraid of this, I would not have taken you with me." And then the Marquise remembered the expression of her frightened face at that moment. "By the way, I've never seen her like this. And I don't remove the grin from my face," he noticed. "I didn't think I'd ever see such an expression on your face." But Claire didn't understand what she was talking about. She was interested in a completely different question. "So why did you take me with you?" The Marquis got up from his chair without thinking, but remained silent. And Claire thought that she had already guessed and answered, "Is it because you need someone to warm your bed?" But the Marquis, in order to refute her words, took out a bundle of paper, handed it to Claire, and said, "Translate this into Latin. Godfather praised your abilities, so I want to check if his praise is true." Claire was very surprised and said in an uncertain voice, "But I thought that I was appointed as a clerk just to bring me here." But Claire got to work anyway. She picked up a pen and a blank sheet of paper and slowly and confidently did what the Marquise instructed her to do. And he, in turn, sat next to her, reading a book at the same time, watching her. But in the process, her gaze fell on the Marquis's bandaged hand. She tried to silently do her work, but still curiosity got the better of her. "How did you get hurt?" The Marquise put the book down, smiled and asked, looking her straight in the eyes, "Are you worried about me?" And Claire immediately turned away and said, "Of course not." Claire was very curious and had one more question. "By the way, why do you need to translate your travel diary?" "My point is that not everyone can read Latin. Is it worth translating a travel diary into a language that is difficult to understand? Besides," she could not finish speaking as the Marquis interrupted her, "You're so different from Jake." Claire was a little taken by this phrase. "Of course. He is a nobleman, and I am a commoner." But the Marquise, slamming the book, said, "No, I'm talking about something else." While the Marquise tried to explain what he meant, Claire turned away from him and listened carefully. "He may be a nobleman, but he will never contradict me. At the same time, you are always trying to cling to something." Well, Claire had her own excuse for this argument, but she couldn't even open her mouth, because the Marquise came up to her and lightly touched her nose with the tip of the book and said, "Do you see? You can't even stop now." Claire was very touched by this, and her eyes sparkled for a second, and her face blushed a little. But still, as always, she turned away from him and said, "I'm glad I'm not like this old-fashioned man." The Marquise got a little angry and said with a smirk on his face, "Old-fashioned, you say?" And after which he plunged into his memories. "Jake has indulged me my whole life. This is how his family raised him. He has such a defensive reaction. He gets nervous about anything and worries about me." Marquis immediately lost his mood and just sat silently next to her. But Claire had already forgotten about her offense and noticed, "Is he protecting Jake? Sometimes another side of him suddenly opens up to me." He rules the domain ruthlessly, but now he looks guilty. Guilty and responsible for the lives of other people. Claire realized the whole situation, and she said with a sincere smile and honest eyes, "Everyone at birth receives what they are entitled to. They don't have the opportunity to choose what kind of life to live. Right, just like I didn't choose." After which Claire remembered her childhood. The Marquis was very surprised that Claire was capable of such touching words. "So, I don't think you should worry about the past. After everything you've seen and done, doesn't it feel like life is too short?" After which she realized that what she said was a little different from what she meant. She grabbed her head and added, "Just like you lived your life honestly." And then the Marquis approached her, gently took her lip and began to listen further. "I'm sure Baron Kians did the same," she whispered quietly, and after which the Marquise could not resist and wanted to continue what he started, and he kissed her tenderly and carefully. They kissed so passionately that their saliva intertwined with each other. They couldn't stop. After a long journey, they both wanted only one thing. And then the Marquis took her leg, and Claire asked in bewilderment, "What does it mean?" But the Marquis answered with a smile on his face, looking straight into her eyes. "Well, since I can't control my desires, I should be true to myself," the Marquis said, looking at her, being between her legs, after which he knelt down, grabbed her legs, and wanted to please her. He began to reach under her cape. "What are you doing?" Claire screamed. She was so pleased that she was shaking all over and even had a few tears. Such a strange feeling. It's so strange. And Claire, all out of breath, barely tore the Marquise away from her and said, "Please, that's enough." But the Marquis did not understand the reason and asked, "Why?" Claire was very embarrassed, and she could not put together a few words. "Well, you know such strange sensations." The Marquise took her hand and responded by biting her fingers a little. "I think there is something more behind these words." He gently licked her fingers and spoke. "Isn't that right?" Claire found this very exciting. After which he knocked her down, and Claire wondered, "But you've never done this before." But the Marquis answered without thinking twice, "This is so. I regret that I didn't do it." After which they kissed passionately again. During this kiss, Claire thought, "Tomorrow I will feel too tired again." And suddenly, in the middle of the kiss, the Marquis abruptly lifted Claire into his arms. She was very frightened by this and asked, "What are you trying to achieve?" But Marquis simply silently began to walk towards the bed. And Claire understood everything without words. He sat the half-naked Claire on the bed, and she began to think. Today the feeling is a little different. Maybe because he did something he had never done before. Slowly taking off his shirt, Marquis said, "I assume you're still conscious enough to be distracted?" After which he threw her onto the bed and made her all red and nervous. "So I should be more patient," he said as he undressed her. The next day, everyone around was fussing and nervous. The Marquise, meanwhile, just got out of bed and began to get ready. And then Max suddenly burst into him and said, "Mister, we're almost completely ready, so—" But before he could finish speaking, the Marquise interrupted him. "Why didn't you knock?" But Max just made a distant face and asked what. "Did you oversleep? You always do everything on time. What happened this time?" Max asked in a malicious voice. But the Marquise was very dissatisfied and responded coldly, "Shut up. So, after we leave this place, we will not see a soft bed for a long time. So it was very smart of you to get some sleep. I can't believe we'll have to cross the rugged Maltese mountains. My back starts to hurt just thinking about it. By the way, do you think you can get to Poussine on time? Maybe we should split up?" Claire overheard this entire conversation. But suddenly, she jumped out of bed and couldn't believe it. Is it morning already? Then, thanks to the early archers of the sun behind the curtain, she saw two silhouettes that were loudly communicating with each other. This caused her shock and only one question. Am I serious? I fell asleep in the Marquise' room? She was covered in a cold sweat and very nervous. The trip has just begun, and I've already let my guard down. And suddenly, when Max and the Marquise were talking, a loud sound was heard from the side of the bed. Max didn't understand what was going on. "What's that there?" Max was about to take out his sword and said, "I heard something. Someone's inside." "Maybe it's an intruder." But the Marquis tried to calm him down. "Never mind, everything is fine." And it was just Claire trying to get ready early in the morning. Where the hell are my priest's things? The Marquis stood and silently looked at the floor. And Max, hiding his sword, also listened to what was happening without making any unnecessary sounds. Meanwhile, only rustling noises were heard from the side of the bed. Hearing these awkward rustles from the side of the bed, Max smiled and said, "So you spent the night with a woman? What a surprise! Damn scoundrel! In addition, I overslept. Wait, does this mean that the owner of this house sent you a woman? I'm so disappointed." But the Marquis could no longer tolerate Max's accusations and covered his face with a cloth and said, "This is the priest." "What?" "In my bed is Priest Thomas." Max, not guessing anything, answered a little nervously, "So it's just the priest that changes everything." But the Marquis opened his eyes to the truth and spoke. "I mean, since he's a priest, I spent the night with him, and he's the one making noise in my bed." Max was very scared. Cold sweat started running down his face, and he screamed, "What?" This scream could be heard throughout the house. Sometime later, they left the house, loaded the carts, and set off. And suddenly, in the middle of the road, a guard ran up to Max and said, "Captain, we have arrived at the foot of the Maltese Mountains." "Okay, we'll arrange a halt, and you check if there are any bandits here." The guard just smiled and answered, "I don't think anyone would dare attack the Marquis. Nobody can be sure. Remember, we are at the borders of Poison, so someone could easily be here, waiting for some absent-minded nobleman. Stay alert. If all this luggage is looted, the bolt will bury us alive." Meanwhile, Claire, who was still sitting in the carriage, transferred to the priest. "Did you hear? You can go out. Priest Thomas." She put on her hood and awkwardly stepped out of the carriage. "We decided to rest here before moving deeper into the Maltese Mountains. While we are in the forest, and we will be here for several days, do not go far from me, okay?" Meanwhile, while Max was talking to her, Claire was not listening to him at all. She turned her head and listened to nature. "I hear the sound of water. Is there a stream somewhere? No one knows who you really are, so please stay close to me." But before Max could finish speaking, Claire took off her hood and said, "I want to wash my hair." Max was in absolute shock and bewilderment. "God, seriously?" Max took her to the stream, and she took out several bottles from her bag and began to gently wash her luxurious and silky hair. "I've been standing here for a long time. Please hurry up." Max spoke irritably. "The captain looked so angry, but I'm still glad he found this place. My hair color has already started to show. I started dyeing my hair so that no one would notice me when I returned to Poussin. And here I am again. Because of the unique color of my eyes and hair, I had to spend my whole life on the run, not even knowing who was really pursuing me. And then she fell into the clutches of that damn nobleman. And he was on the list of the most heartless men in my life. It's like the Altus wind, just as cold, but its touch makes my whole body burn." She froze and blushed a little from the memories of yesterday. "Why am I even thinking about this? We need to hurry." And just as she was about to leave, an arrow flew to her left. Just a few more centimeters, and the arrow would have hit her. She was very scared and did not know what to do. Out of fear, she froze in place and felt someone behind her draw the blade of a sword or dagger. She was already ready to die. She thought that her head would be cut off right away, but to her surprise, they simply put the blades to her neck. She immediately turned around. When she turned around, she saw a man in front of her who smiled maliciously. He was dressed in a completely black robe. Holding the blades to her throat, he said, "You better not open your mouth if you don't want to die, priest." She looked around and thought, "Damn it, we need to find the captain as quickly as possible." But the thief understood what Claire was thinking and said, "I know what you're thinking, but my subordinates have already found something to keep your friends busy. I can't believe I could easily fall into the hands of a bandit, and you are smart enough for a nobleman." She had already lost all hope and was simply looking at the floor in despair. "Why does this always happen to me?" "Of course, Claire. You've fallen into a trap again. So why not finally surrender into the clutches of death right now? You always considered death to be a way out of any situation. Nobody will save you. It's better to die now than to be upset later." As always, she's right. If I die at the hands of a bandit, no one can judge me. Even Aunt Gelda will understand if I die like this. Now I can finally say goodbye to my miserable life. Pressing the blade to her Adam's apple, the bandit said, "And you are also very pretty for a priest." The bandit noticed with a malicious smile. "Doesn't this mean that you—" But before he could finish speaking, Claire took sand in her hands and threw it in his eyes. "I don't want to run away from reality anymore," she shouted heroically. The bandit immediately screamed, "My eyes! How painful it is!" And before he had time to recover, Claire stood up and was about to run. "It worked! I still have a chance to escape!" But suddenly, despite his eyes, the bandit grabbed her hand and shouted, "Where did you go?" "I thought I was blind." "Nice try, but pointless." Claire tried to break free and screamed, "Let me go, please!" But all attempts were pointless, and she had already lost all hope. When suddenly she saw blood splashes and couldn't believe her eyes. Was they really killing me? But why don't I feel pain? But then she saw how the bandit's mouth began to bleed, and he slowly began to fall. And the Marquis stood behind him. His sword was covered in blood, and his look was very scared and naive. He almost cried and was very worried about her. Claire ... I was so worried. Claire had never felt so light at heart. She knew that she was already safe. She was very grateful to him. "You saved me." With a bloody sword in his hands, he grabbed her and screamed in a fit of emotion. "Are you okay? Wounded?" But Claire didn't answer anything out of fear and thought, he was sweating so much. But the Marquis couldn't find any room for himself and continued, "Answer!" The Marquis was all out of breath and very worried. "Were you wounded in the neck or somewhere else?" "I've never seen him breathe so heavily outside of his bedroom." Claire just silently continued to look at him and admire him. She could barely stand on her feet, but she still said, "Damn it. What took you so long? Do you even understand how scared I was?" After which she fell unconscious, but the Marquis managed to catch her. She was lying in his arms, and the Marquis was screaming, "Claire, wake up!" Meanwhile, near the carts, the guards gathered the bandits captive. They were all trembling with fear and very nervous, and everyone was beheaded by the Marquis in turn. He didn't spare anyone. Next. He didn't even react to mercy. "Wait! Please let me go." Usually, after such words, he cut off the bandits' heads. All that came out of his mouth was just a single phrase, which he pronounced coldly and without emotion. The next one, he brought terror and fear to the bandits. The bandits were beheaded one by one. And then when they grabbed the next bandit, he was in tears and in despair, shouted, "Captain!" And then, when the Marquis was about to cut off his head with his sharp and at the same time bloody sword, someone suddenly shouted, "Wait!" He was very scared and shouted in a trembling voice, "I am their leader! If you want to repay someone, kill me!" They did what I told them. The Marquis, without thinking twice, put the blades to the bandit's throat and said, "They followed the orders of an incompetent leader, so they must pay for their misdeeds. But we didn't kill any of yours. Because why kill any of us?" This phrase really hurt the Marquis. "I'm very sorry that your crew suffered because of us." But before he could finish speaking, the Marquis grabbed him sharply. He pressed him so close to himself that he could breathe right into his nose. "They didn't kill anyone, you say? Doesn't that mean you couldn't do it?" He lifted him by the collar and began to choke him. "If I had been even a little late, you would have killed everyone." Max sensed something was wrong and tried to calm Marquis. "Control yourself, Bolt!" The priest is already under the supervision of a doctor. He said that he feels fine, so give us the opportunity to investigate this situation. What if someone is behind the attack? After these words, the Marquis calmed down a little and let the bandit go. And he, in turn, began to breathe very loudly because he almost died. And just as the Marquis was about to leave, he heard screams behind him. The leader of these bandits screamed through his tears, "No one is behind this. We just wanted to rob you. We didn't intend to hurt anyone's love. We captured the priest just to scare you. It's just that if we had a nobleman in our hands, it would be easier to extort money." The two of them were at a loss, and they didn't understand what he was talking about. If I had known that everything would turn out this way, I would have remained sitting in the boat in the Jurassic Sea. The Marquis did not understand and asked again. "In the boat? We tried to create our own bandit group, but our partners were killed." "Crap! Everything that happens in the Empire is the fault of the nobles. Creatures! After these screams, Max thought, why does his manner of speech sound so familiar? In addition, you are the light of his hair. Well, his words sound quite logical, considering that the only thing that was hurt was the crew. I don't think they attacked us with the intention of killing us, Marquis thought logically. Please, sir, don't kill us. They are like family to me, so please, kill me, but leave them alive. All this chatter made Max's head spin, and he took it up. All the commoners we met along the way were strongly attached to their families. Their leader had already lowered his head down. Thus he was preparing for his death. His tears flowed like a river, and flowed down from his cheek to his knee. He did not even hope that his life would be spared. He only begged not to touch his team. The Marquis shook off his sword from someone else's blood and looked at the bandit with a cold gaze. And just as he was about to swing his sword, Max asked him, "What are you going to do, sir?" Meanwhile, Claire had already recovered. She flew off looking at the drops of blood. Holding her hand, there was not a drop of confusion on her face. And then the doctor asked her, "Are you in that much pain, Priest Thomas?" "It's okay, it's just a scratch. Those damn bandits. I can't believe it. Try to take a priest hostage. Please take off your cloak. We need to look at you for other wounds." Claire was a little nervous and answered, "I'm really fine." She squeezed her hand and turned away from him. The priest did not understand what was going on. "I already know who the real person is, so don't worry." This news made Claire very happy. Did the captain tell him? And then Claire raised her hands, and the doctor began to examine her. "I already said, the only wound on my body is on the back of my hand. There is no other damage. You can't know for sure. Besides, if a scar remains, Gelda will be very upset." And after that, in the village, he froze in place in surprise. "What? Gelda?" She already worries a lot about her niece and so on. And before he had time to agree, Claire interrupted him. "Do you know my aunt? We've been on good terms ever since I helped her heal her shift wounds from a previous incident. Gelda never told you anything about me?" Now I realize that Auntie was always the center of attention, although I found it very annoying. "If you think about it, yes, I remember her mentioning you." This news made the doctor sparkle with happiness. He was sincerely glad that Gelda had not forgotten about him, after which he moved closer to her and began to ask, "Is it true? Are you sure?" Turning away, Claire covered her mouth with her hand and thought, "Isn't he afraid of getting burned like that?" After that, she looked at him and thought, what made him fall in love with his aunt? But the doctor only looked at the floor in embarrassment and spoke. "So she still talked about me. How can you even understand whether you are in love or not? I've always been curious about what love is. The love of a friend, loved one, and parents. This concept called love is something I never had. What's so special about it? I have seen many interpretations of love in books, and I was sure that I understood what it was about. But even now, we are far from this understanding." But suddenly, when Claire was flying in the clouds, her thoughts were interrupted by a very loud scream. This made her shudder and get a little scared. The doctor heard this cry. They stood rooted to the spot together and heard loud human screams. And then, looking at the floor, the doctor said coldly, "I thought he had already decided everything with these bandits. I'll go clean up the corpses." He does not change the decision he has already made, so I am sure he killed every last one. Do you agree with this, Claire? Claire was a little confused and unsure of her answer. "Don't even know," because this man can be unusually soft-hearted. Meanwhile, the mercenary leader was completely shocked and looked at the floor. His contractor stood next to him with tears in his eyes and calmed him down. And the Marquis, who had put his sword back in his holster, silently left. Next to him was Max, who was nervously saying something, after which all the other mercenaries rushed to the leader and with tears in their eyes began to calm him down. Max, with cold sweat on his forehead, turned, looked at the mercenaries and said, "I can't believe that you saved their lives. I appreciate your decision, but please share the reason for such generosity. I have to explain myself to the knights. You said that you were used to life on a ship." "Yes, that's right. We worked all our lives on the ship with the leader." "Here's your reason." Max was confused and wondered, how does this relate to working on a ship? Does this mean that he is trying to get some information about the pirates? But why does he want to use them? There are many reliable ways to get information, so why? And while Max was thinking, a servant ran up to the Marquise. Mister, I finished my treatment with Priest Thomas, after which the Marquis asked, Where is he? He said that he would rest by the stream. Are you saying he's alone after what he's been through? We must introduce a knight to her. He is clearly in shock after what happened. He needs to be alone with himself. And while they were arguing, the Marquis said coldly, I'll go to her myself. What? But sir, what to do with these? But no matter how Max called Marquise, he did not react and simply continued walking towards the stream. And holding his head, he thought, always does only what he wants. This woman is really strange if she wants to be alone after what happened. Well, yes. I immediately noticed something else was wrong at our first meeting. But suddenly, his gaze fell on the leader, whose tears were flowing, and he thought, just a minute. Chief Bandit and this woman, they have obvious similarities. His brash manner of speech, even his appearance. And suddenly he guessed. So, Bolt, doesn't that mean he let that bandit live because he looks like Claire? Now I see an incredible similarity. A few minutes later, the Marquis approached Claire, who was modestly sitting on a log. After he sat down next to her, he lowered his gaze to the floor and said, I started talking to myself. And then Claire asked the obvious question. Sir, have you killed all the bandits? What? Do you want them all to die? Number, I don't really care. But if they are dead, I think I would like to honor their memory. I know that they are these good people, but they probably also have families. The Marquis was a little angry at Claire's words, and after he clenched his hand into a fist, he asked, Are you serious? He approached her and touched Claire's tender face with his hand and asked, After everything they did to you? Claire looked at him and thought, Why is he acting this way? He looks at me like he's worried about me. But she moved the Marquise away from her and said, It's just a scratch. Compared to what happened when I broke my ankle, I can't even call it a wound. Claire touched her lip with her hands, and the Marquis watched closely. And then the Marquise turned to her. Claire! Under the moonlit sky and with the stars behind him, the Marquis asked, Are you mad at me for this? Then a strong wind blew, and Claire answered, Don't know. I was so irritable because of the discomfort. But what's strange is, I think it's easier for me now. Her delicate hair was tousled in the wind, and she looked at him shyly. Why are you interested in this? You never cared about my health before. After which the Marquise could not stand it, and approaching her, he firmly took her hand. I just don't want to hurt you anymore. And after these words, they kissed passionately under the clear night sky. And when they looked at each other for a second, he added, This upsets me. And Claire wondered, Why? And looking her straight in the eyes, he asked sincerely, No idea. What do you think? These words turned Claire on very much, and she jumped on the Marquis and hugged his neck.